It was definitely quite overwhelming at first to be looking through the archive because I'd never worked with archives before, so I didn't really know where to start, what to expect, and I'd kind of had these ideas of what I might find in the archive. But it was totally different. Like the things that I kind of was drawn towards were different to what I thought I might be looking for. So it was really interesting. The archives were just full of photographs of these really kind of like joyous sort of celebrations, lots of parades, lots of community projects, lots of kind of DIY type things. And it felt to me like there were two sort of threads that I could really see in the archive running through. A lot of it was collaboration and transformation. So those two things were what I tried to keep in mind as kind of anchor points for the work that I made, because it just felt like I could go in a million different directions. So it was quite overwhelming, but at the same time, like just a really good opportunity. One very influential thing that I found in that archive that has influenced the shape of the show in general was an image of a piece of work that a young person or a child had made during a workshop, which was a casting workshop. And they'd kind of cast their favourite sportswear motifs in this kind of really simple way in plaster, and kind of assembled it into this kind of like little plaque. And I thought that that was really interesting because I feel like if you're going to cast something in plaster, you're kind of asking the audience to take it seriously as you are taking it. You're putting a lot of importance kind of on these images. So I really liked that piece, and I had it in my mind that I wanted to have like a sort of template running out through the show that I can kind of place different imagery on, just kind of anchor all the imagery. And that was this butterfly template, which also for me kind of stands in as kind of a figure in the space, or sort of that performative element of costumes, or just to reference people. So I thought I'd take this idea, kind of push it a little bit further and think about what motifs I could design for Artlink. Sportswear motifs in general for me are quite interesting. I quite like the kind of graphic quality of them. So I was taking that, but also thinking about decorative motifs from sort of antiquity and combining them so that I'm kind of making these very over the top, decorative, kind of feminine motifs that are related to sportswear, and setting them within this butterfly shape again. And also in the archive, there's a lot of sportswear because it's running throughout the sort of 90s, noughties. So that was really cool to see like the kind of fashion of the day represented like so much in the archive. And I wanted to kind of bring that into the show as well. I work with sort of all different kinds of materials because that just feels like quite a natural way of working for me. I'm also really interested in sort of layering of materials and pattern and colour. My painting process, I feel like, lends itself a lot to printmaking, because of how I make paintings is to kind of build up these layers of colour and pattern and motif, almost like a woodblock print, I always think. And there are recurrent things through my work that I see come up a lot, sort of gradients of colour, symmetry and flatness are big themes within my work. And the symmetry especially feels important because it makes me think of the human body, and kind of I'm interested in how we might represent bodies without actually showing a physical body, because I don't necessarily feel very comfortable with representing actual people in my work. So clothing is something I come back to a lot. I think obviously clothing is designed for the body. So again, you get that kind of symmetry and those lines that I really like. There are lots and lots of reasons why I'm drawn towards it, sort of political reasons around sort of self-expression, self-presentation, also kind of how you might bolster yourself and protect yourself through clothing as kind of a shield. That's something I think about a lot. I have explored some new processes through creating this show. I screen printed for the first time, which was really great because I am interested in print. So to learn a whole new printing process has been brilliant. I also got to work with Fraser, who's a really skilled screen printer who is sort of in-house at 87 Gallery. And he was excited to print onto Japanese chiffon, which he'd never done before and I'd never done before, which is the fabric that I've made the textile pieces from. It was kind of a tricky fabric to screen print on because it's so fine. But what I liked about it was that I could kind of layer up pieces of fabric once they'd been printed, and you can kind of see through. There's a little bit of transparency, so you can kind of see through to the different designs and imagery. So it was kind of like, I thought it would give me the option to put those garments together in quite a loose way, kind of play around with how different pieces worked on top of other pieces, and just have like a bit more looseness to those pieces of work compared to the paintings and sculptures, which are more sort of planned out. Also, we decided to use iridescent paint on top of the chiffon. So when you're kind of really looking at it, you get a nice kind of sheen, which I felt lend itself a little bit to butterflies' wings. So I wanted to kind of be playful with some of the work that I made for this show. What I was really struck by in Hull is that there's definitely a very generous kind of attitude towards art in a way. I was struck by the amount of public art that you're able to come into contact with in Hull that just exists alongside the residents of those areas, and they sort of then just become these backdrops to people's lives. And I really like that idea that people can kind of just rub up against artworks in a really casual way in Hull. One particular one that I really liked was the River Horse statue, which is on the corner of Albany Street. It just made me think that people will just be kind of looking out of their living room windows and seeing this hippo there, like throughout maybe their whole lifetime, from being a kid to being an adult. And it was just, I thought, a really nice way for people to be able to engage with art. And also, I get the sense that in Hull, there's kind of a sense of humour around art in a way. There's a lot of art and sculpture around that just feels very fun, and that there's an emphasis on art being sort of enjoyable and a celebration. So that's something that I was inspired by when thinking about this show. It was definitely overwhelming at first, the sheer amount of material in the archive, and just the millions of ways I could have gone with it, and also not necessarily finding in the archive what I expected I would find. But it felt important to me that I had to kind of stay true to my own interests as an artist and just kind of use that as a lens to interpret this material through. That I hope people kind of interact with the show is that they're kind of curious to look at the smaller details in the work. I quite like making work that's got a lot of detail, a lot of pattern and imagery that you can untangle, or you can give those things their own meaning. So I hope that people kind of spend a bit of time kind of looking at the smaller details. One thing that I feel like would be really great is if someone from Hull might recognise things in the work from their own life. One of my textile pieces, which is called AL Vistas, takes its main pattern from an enlarged image of the Holmthorpe flats, which actually aren't there anymore. They were demolished, but they stand on the Orchard Park Estate area, or they stood there, sorry. And they've featured a lot within the archive over the years. There's a lot of community projects that Artlink had led with the residents of those flats. And one that stood out was an artist had designed a motif with the residents that was going to be projected on the side of the flats. It was kind of like a Christmas angel that they were going to project on the side of the flats. And I really like that idea of using that ginormous building as kind of like a huge billboard for this artwork. So I'd kind of taken this image of the flats that I'd found in a newspaper cutting and enlarged it. And then I recognised that it had like these graphic qualities about it that I am really drawn to in my work. And then it made for a really interesting kind of repeat pattern for these textile pieces. And also it kind of, what I noticed through screen printing is that it had a little bit of the quality of a butterfly's wing up close. This kind of like these clusters of kind of tiny dots. But it's one of those things that I think that somebody might not notice that is what it is. because it's kind of abstracted, it's been enlarged and kind of taken out of context. So I like that in the show you can try and find out more about little details, or you could just enjoy it on a kind of purely aesthetic level. I went to uni at Newcastle Uni, did their fine art BA. That was a really great experience for me. I had some really great tutors who were really influential for me. I was just really lucky to have some really interesting tutors, really like motivated peers around me as well. So it took me a couple of years. I graduated in 2018 and I kind of stayed in Newcastle, was working full time, and I was just not making anything. And then the pandemic happened and I took that as a kind of sign to kind of move home and focus on making work. And for me, like every day that I get to spend in the studio is like this massive achievement, because, you know, you've got to put the time in, don't you? And it's like any artist will know like how difficult it is to actually kind of like get into the studio and just make stuff. So this experience working with the show has been great, because it's given me a bit of that momentum back as well, where I've made all this new body of work within the last sort of 4 months. So it's been really intense, and I've kind of not had much time to overthink it. It's just been kind of making and producing, and now I'm really excited to even make the next body of work as well and be influenced by what I've done here. One thing I realised that I'd never realised before is I really enjoy having sort of a starting point. And when making work with this show, I had the archive as a starting point, but that was so broad that I felt like I needed to have one more thing that I could kind of work with that would kind of set everything else in motion. So I chose this butterfly motif. There's a lot of butterflies in the archive as well. There's sort of a lot of face painting, a lot of various sort of butterfly imagery going on. But having this kind of shape as a starting point to add other imagery and pattern and decoration on top of, but constantly sort of referencing that shape or corresponding to that shape was really great. And it's made me realise that that's how I want to make work. Hopefully there'll be an end point where maybe there's a narrative or meaning to it, but that can be very sort of open-ended, and to not worry too much about the end product. I do feel that the research and development I've done has really influenced me as an artist going forward. I've done things very differently for this show than I've done in the past. So I'm really inspired now to kind of take that forward and make more work using a lot of the things I discovered making this show.